I hope you're having a great day. My name is Nathan Brummel, and I'm here with my wife today.
Good morning. My name is Paula Brummel, and I am excited about books and about reading to children.
Today we're going to talk about the importance of reading aloud to children, and then we're going to move towards the importance of reading the Bible aloud to children. Now, the reason we're sitting here is that a number of months back, my wife was so excited. She had read a book, and it impacted her. Maybe you could share about that book.
I had read Sarah Mackenzie's book, Read Aloud Family, Making Meaningful and Lasting Connections with Your Kids. And I really liked some of the things that Sarah had talked about, how bonding happens with your children as we're reading aloud. And I was a school teacher for years, and it was a special time to have the kids on the carpet around me and sit on a chair, and we'd share time just with books.
Now, as you read this book, though, what struck me is that suddenly you began to get excited about like a little different topic than what was covered in the book, right?
Right. I started thinking about how exciting to have a follow-up to this book, actually, maybe called Read the Bible Family, and making significant and eternal bonds with the rising generation. And so it was like this light went off in my head that books are important, and they help us teach things to kids, but isn't it the book, the Bible, that we really want our kids to be hearing from us?
So I saw that my wife was making some notes to work on this idea, and I thought, well, let's get together and let's talk about it. And let's talk about the value of reading aloud, what it's meant to us even when we were children, and then, what are some of the values of it? I mean, this book by Sarah Mackenzie seems to argue that there's something, psychologically beneficial about reading aloud to children, that it's, it's good for their psychology, it's good for bonding with dad and mom. No doubt it's good for the imagination. And so what we want to do in this first segment is we want to talk about just the value of reading aloud. Not necessarily the Bible at this point, but just reading good Christian literature to your children. Now, I want to talk about, how in my childhood, how important this was. So go back to grade school. I went to the free Christian school, which was not free. My parents had to pay a lot of tuition. It was a small, basically two-room schoolhouse. And in this two-room schoolhouse, there was, I had kindergarten through third grade in one room with one teacher, although I had a different kindergarten teacher, but the rest, first through third, same teacher. And then fourth grade through ninth grade, in my case, with one teacher all the way through. Now, in that small schoolhouse, our teachers would read aloud to us. Now, I can remember a book read when I was between first and third grade, and it's this book right here, Baby Island. And, I remember Miss Hoekstra reading this book to me when I was a little kid. That just shows the power of reading aloud and the role that can play in your memory of books. That's the story, of course, of these girls getting, stranded on an island in the middle of the Pacific with little babies, and then their final recovery at the end. And then also when I was in what was called the big room, because that was the older kids, usually it was the 5th through 9th grade, there my teacher, who was Uncle Pete, we called him, although he was actually my dad's first cousin, Pete Brummel, he read the book Across 5 Aprils. And I can still remember the impact that this book had on me. It's a story of the Civil War, which went across 5 Aprils. And it's tracing a boy who at the beginning is plowing a field. He's a farmer, and then he gets involved in the drama of the Civil War. So that's quite a book. So isn't it striking that, I can remember these books that were read to me many, many moons ago now. And then another memory I have of reading aloud is reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, of course, which is a favorite book. I've read this aloud a number of times to my children, but one time especially I remember reading this book aloud when we were camping. We were in a tent or something like that. And I was reading aloud to my children, and what a fun, enjoyable thing it was to read this book aloud. Just marvelous language, and just, it fires the imagination. Now, what about you?
Yeah, I also have early memories of reading. I remember my mom on Sunday afternoon reading to me, and she would read these books with morals to them, things that you'd have to really think about. Like, I remember a story in this old book she had, and it was about a little girl who was sick in bed, and she asked her brother, will you bring me some water? And her brother just went merrily on his way and ran outside and forgot about his sister, and his sister died, and maybe she had a fever or something. But the story that made an impact, or the story Muffle with a little dog. My mom, I begged that story over and over from my mom. And then
so children love repetition.
Yes.
It's just as much fun the second time and the third time and the fourth time.
Right, I just finished reading Peter Rabbit and all the stories in the treasury to my daughter just last night. We finished it, and that story is so fun, just over and over. I remember even the librarian when I was a little girl, Mr. Patterson. He was a big, robust man, but he had such a tender heart, and he would gather us all on the carpet around his chair in the library, and he would read to us. And maybe it was him that got me excited with Terry and the Caterpillar or Greg's Microscope. These science books for children that get your mind thinking about things that are happening around us. And I love these books, and I found them on a book sale and had to buy them so I could read them to my children. And then there was the book Brave Betsy, that every year when I was a school teacher, I would welcome my kids into school, and on that first day I'd always read Brave Betsy. It was a little girl who had left her coloring set at school over the summer, and she goes back to get it, and it's a wonderful book, and just makes for a wonderful cozy time in a classroom at school, or just a time for kids to sit back and enjoy themselves in the home with their parents.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think it is that children love to be read to? I think one reason they like to be read to, isn't it because they don't have to do any work? Especially when younger children are learning how to read, reading can take some work. And so when dad and mom read to you, you can just sit back and relax. Now your imagination is being fired.
Oh, yes.
But you're not having to do the work of reading. So I think that's part of it. Now I think there's a whole different dynamic though, I think, when I'm reading something and then I'm listening to someone else read. Like lately I've got into listening to audiobooks. And there's a different dynamic going. It has to do with the voice. When you have guys like Scott Brick, who is a marvelous reader with a wonderful voice, reading a book, it adds a whole nother dynamic of excitement to it too.
And that's how our kids also learn how to read with expression. There was a man on the radio on Moody. He was can't think of his name right now, but he had just a wonderful voice, and he would read things, and it just encouraged me as a school teacher to be to work on my expression and to read things with feeling and with empathy and care.
I think reading aloud is probably important for some kids who learn how to read very slowly. There are some children, like some of my students, who simply didn't learn how to read well when they were younger. So I think they were probably much older before they actually could read like a novel for the first time and actually enjoy it. Well, it seems to me that in that space of time before some people learn how to read well so they can actually enjoy it, if they hear someone else reading to them, they can begin to see what the experience of reading is like and what it's like to have your imagination fired. Of course, in a world where we're surrounded by the visual arts, people need to understand the value of just reading again.
One of our family favorites is Roxaboxen. It's made such an impact on my children that we have a Roxaboxen on the far corner of our yard that's in the woods, and it's been lawn-mowed down and cut back, and bricks and things have been moved to make a special place in the woods.
And
where
lately,
they can...
aluminum has even been smelted there. Aluminum cans have been smelted down to get aluminum ingots.
Yes, and then there's the old book B is for Betsy. I would read these books to my students at school, and you'd go on Betsy's Adventures, her and Billy, and oh, what fun we'd have. And we'd learn all about being obedient and about being careful as you cross the street through books. It's true. We do learn things from books. It's amazing. And then there's books like Linnea, who goes to Monets Garden, and what a fun book to learn all about an artist through a book, through a kid's book with
Great pictures
such
too.
delightful pictures.
I mean,
It's so fun.
maybe part of the beauty of reading to your children is that, if you have a book that has pictures in it, that plays a positive role. Even like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, the pictures in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in the original edition are not all that fancy, but there's really a beauty and a simplicity in them. They're just plain, like pencil drawings, but boy, they can fire the imagination too.
Right, and then you have to love James Herriot's animal stories. How fun we'd have. We're really going on a trip to England, and we're discovering what the countryside is like, and the buildings and the architecture, and what delightful books. And
Now, I think one thing too, you find out when your children are developing and maturing with their reading, then what happens is you find that they are so much enjoying other people reading to them, they begin to have fun reading to others. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I think of times when I and my father are driving, in a pickup with my son Peter, and he's reading to us, and we're going fishing, and he's reading to us from Patrick McManus, the outdoor humorist, who's a very dangerous person to read at night when you're trying to fall asleep, because if you're laying in bed next to your wife, you'll laugh and you'll wake her up. But my point is, it's a good sign when your children, they find the joy and the excitement and the fun of reading aloud as well.
Just a few months ago, I had asked my children, why is it that you like me to read to you, or my husband read to you? And Peter, age 14, says, I can think more about the story. Or, so I don't have to read myself.
See, that's the issue of how there's a lack of work involved, I think. More pure enjoyment.
My daughter had a cute one. Your voice sounds a lot better than my own when I read to myself. It's soothing. It makes me relax. I said, it's a cozy thing to do. I feel like I'm doing something grand. And my husband had said,
my imagination is working at a higher level. Now, I think that's interesting, especially if I'm reading myself in a context where I'm being distracted. Sometimes if I'm just stuck driving in my car and I really don't have a lot of distractions, then when I have someone reading to me through Audible, I can really concentrate and my imagination can be seized.
I mean, how cozy is it, right? To sit on the couch, or I have an armchair and my kids just perch on one on each arm and we sit all snug together, and we did that just last night. We were reading the Treasury by of Peter Rabbit, and it's just such a good story, and we like to hear it over.
So I think there are benefits of reading to your children. For one, your children appreciate the fact that you're spending time with them, so it's a bonding time. Also, you're getting a chance to share the story together. And, it's different from watching television, where in some sense, you're far more passive. When you're watching a visual thing, you really don't have to do any work. Now, when you're listening to a story, then your imagination has to do all the work of imagining the scenes.
One of the things Sarah McKenzie had made a point is that there's little memories that you're making with your children too. So the other day while we're doing dishes, we're laughing about something that we remembered. We all remembered it from a story, and we remember which book, and maybe they even remember where we were sitting. Sometimes we're out on the lawn on a quilt that we'll throw out at lunch hour, and we'll just sit on the lawn and just read outside, or maybe it's on the front porch or on the sofa, or there's just so many places upstairs while they're playing Legos or doing something. So
now I think too, one thing is that reading aloud to your children is a space in which you can teach your children your values. So, for example, I'm not going to read a book to my children that just bores me out of my mind. I'm going to read to them like a Dr. Seuss book because it's so funny and intriguing. Or, I'm going to read them a book, about church history that I think it's important for them to learn about. Or it's another book that has meant something to me and that's fired my imagination. I'm not going to read to them a filthy, junky book. So part of what you're doing when you're reading aloud too is you're trying to teach your children about what kind of good literature is out there or what good things there are to learn about.
And there's resources too that you can go to that explain good literature. And I think so many times the libraries have kind of dumbed down things because they're playing to a crowd that's watching movies, and they have to have all these books about these movies where there's really good literature. I'm excited about this fall when my daughter and I are going to travel the world through literature. And this book that's just sitting on the top of my pile, One Morning in Maine, you can go to Maine through literature. And so that's going to be really fun. We're going to go around the world and we're going to read books that happened in different places and study geography that way. What an exciting adventure we're going to have.
And what strikes me is that, our daughter doesn't have to travel to Maine by herself in her imagination. When you're reading aloud to her, what happens is that you go together. So I think that's the beauty of reading together, is that you share together this experience of going to Maine.
Right.
Now, today we've mainly talked about just our own experiences with reading aloud in the past and some of the benefits of it, why we love it. And next time what we want to do is we want to talk about, why should we read the Bible? If reading good Christian literature to your children is something to be encouraged, isn't above all reading the Bible the big thing? And then what does the Bible say about reading the Bible? And then, how do you do that in an effective way? And at the same time talk about, well, how has our family in their generations read the Bible? And so we're going to move from, just the value of reading good books to the value of reading the Bible out loud to your children.